Now it's time to learn about pollination and how pollination works. So today we have an expert, Mrs. Donna Stockton-Ing, who is an animal keeper here at the zoo. So, Donna, do you take care of lions and elephants?
No, actually I take care of invertebrates, which are animals without backbones. They represent about 98% of all animals on Earth.
Well, I hear that you're a pollination expert.
Not so much an expert, but I did study in school an insect that was really attracted to pollen in the cornfields.
Well, I hear you're going to tell us about pollination.
There's a lot to learn.
All right.
Well, everyone, pollination is very important in the life cycle of a plant. It's how flowering plants reproduce and create new seeds and fruit so that new plants can be grown. Now, there are over 400,000 species of flowering plants that require pollination to reproduce. They're as different as impatiens and orchids and watermelon and all kinds of different fruits. So let's take a look at some plant parts and see how pollination is accomplished. Right here, the stamen is the male part of the flower. It has a filament and an anther. An anther is where the pollen is produced. On the female part of the flower, it's called the pistil. The pistil includes the stigma, the style, and the ovary. When pollen from another plant lands on the stigma, it grows a long tube down to the ovule. Once the ovule is fertilized, it produces a seed. Now, in the case where you see obvious fruit, that's just the ripened ovary. Now, pollination looks pretty simple, but sometimes it can get a bit complicated. If you're a plant, you're basically rooted to one spot. You have to figure out how to get your pollen to another plant so that you can produce seeds and fruit. So plants enlisted the help of natural mechanisms such as wind and water and animal pollinators. So let's take a look at some grasses and trees. They produce millions of pollen grains for every female part of the flower. They do a lot of hard work to get their pollen where it needs to go. Let's take a look at these trees and see how they're pollinating. Now notice only a few pollen grains are actually making it to each tree. A lot gets wasted on the ground. So when you produce millions of pollen grains, it really is hard to get that part fertilized. Now aquatic plants have the same problem. They depend on water to get their pollen where it needs to go. And sometimes that just doesn't happen too fast. It's a good thing that 80% of flowering plants use animal pollinators to get their pollen where it needs to go. Animal pollinators help the plant where they don't have to produce as much pollen to reproduce. They also can produce pollen in smaller quantities, can be larger, and they make it sticky and spiky so it can actually stick to their pollinator that's pollinating them. Let's take a look and see how this bee is actually helping the flowers pollinate. Now, wasn't that quick? Pollinators save plants a lot of time and a lot of energy when they actually get pollination done. Now let's take a look at the pollen grain itself. Pollen grains are very microscopic. That means they're really small. They tend to be also very textured and spiky. This causes us to sneeze and itch when we breathe it in and get it on our skin. But the pollen grain on the inside only lasts for about a few hours to a few weeks. Whereas the pollen grain on the outside is very hard. It's called sporopollenin, and that can last for thousands of years. Scientists have found pollen grains way back in the Jurassic period, and that's about 150 million years ago. From these pollen grain fossils, we can tell which plants lasted or lived way long time ago. Now, the pollen grain itself comes in yellow and reds and oranges or hues of blues and green, but they can also be an important food resource for pollinators. Sometimes pollinators need a lot of protein, so have some bee. It's a very hungry bee. Here, you can have this. Now, plants make a great effort to attract pollinators to them. They come in all kinds of colors and shapes and sizes, and there you go. Can you go around the back? They advertise like this. They say, "I smell good and I have sweet nectar." Take a look at this bee. Wow, isn't that kind of cool? So pollinators such as butterflies have big flat flowers because they can land on it and stick their noses in and rest while they eat. Whereas pollinators like hummingbirds have long tubular flowers where they can stick their bills in and actually still fly while they eat. Now these pollen advertisements or plant advertisements cost these plants a lot of energy, but it's worth it for getting all your pollen to the right spot in the right amount of time. Bees and butterflies and other pollinators have found a mutual relationship with their plants so that bees can get the necessary food they need and the plant can actually get the pollen to the right place at the right time. Now let's meet a few of those pollinators. Butterflies are very important pollinators. They have beautiful long wings, they have a long nose that gets way into the plant, and then they actually get pollen on the tip of their proboscis. When they do this, they visit another flower and they'll stick that proboscis in to the plant and the plant gets pollinated. Now they're not great as pollinators as bees because they like to sit on the edge of the flower. Now bees are great pollinators. They're fuzzy, they have lots of hair, they pick up a lot of pollen. They even have special features on their legs that are curved so they can pack all the pollen in. They're called pollen baskets. Now because bees visit so many flowers in a certain amount of time, they are the best pollinators and they're the driving force of pollination. Flies. Flies are very frequent visitors to flowers. They actually look like bees for the most part, but if you look real close, you'll see that flies have short antennae and very big wings. Now, flies aren't as hairy as bees, but they visit a lot of flowers, and there's a ton of flies out there, so they make great pollinators as well. Now, beetles are a diverse group of insects. They're coming long and short and round and fat, and they just get to a lot of pollinators. They get their whole body in because they're really hairy. Hummingbirds have colorful wings and very long bills, so they like to get their nose all the way in the flower. And because hummingbirds are so busy and they require a lot of nectar, they really feed frequently. They get pollen around to where it needs to be. Now, bats are our nighttime pollinators, and along with moths, they love sweet, fragrant things because bats don't really use their vision at night. They use their sense of smell. They love flowers that are big and white and purple and green. Now, we've met a lot of pollinators, and there's really a lot more out there, like ants and crickets, and in other countries there's monkeys and things like that. But now that we've learned so much about these pollinators and how important they are to the ecosystem, let's go learn some more.